I hope all of you have the ability to see my screen. If somebody can give me a quick thumbs up on the chat, if you have the ability to see my screen, that'll be great, and we'll get started off. Excellent. So first of all, good afternoon and welcome everybody to this seminar or this webinar, which is all about how to use automation to comply with the new CERT-In guidelines. But that's not the only syllabus. Obviously, we've got a lot more to cover out here. And I think this is going to be a great session. So before we get into this, I do want to welcome our eminent speakers and panelists, my co-panelists for today. So first up, we have Payal Sampath, who is the Associate Vice President for Threat Intelligence at HDFC Bank. Welcome, Payal. Pleasure to meet you again. And it's always a great pleasure to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Likewise, Anand. Thanks.
So Payal, we'd love to hear about, what you're doing at HDFC Bank, what's happening in the world of cybersecurity and so on and so forth. So, quick couple of bites on that before we get to the actual set of questions.
Sure. So I've been with HDFC Bank for 5 years now, more than 5 years actually. And I've been looking at their cybersecurity operations center. That's how I started my journey with HDFC Bank. I was leading a team for security monitoring and detection. A lot of work goes in back there, and I did a lot of threat hunts, created a lot of use cases for appropriate monitoring and detection, and started off with that, building a lot of processes. Got into incident management and response. I got appreciated for a few of the incident, root cause analysis that was done. So got appreciated for that by the management of the bank. I'm also actively right now responsible for a threat intelligence unit that the bank has. We have our own team of researchers, nothing very fancy at the moment, but yes, we have our own threat intelligence unit. Have been a part of automation and the next gen, as we call SIM, and the SOC, bringing in the automation and the other factors such as threat hunting and threat intelligence into play. So that has been one of my key roles with the bank, and currently I'm pursuing the same. So it's been great working with them.
Yeah, and I mean, we're all proud of the fact that HDFC Bank is probably the largest private bank in the country and probably one of the largest in the world as well. And the fact that you do whatever you said you do is, I think, very valuable to some of the folks on this webinar and this audience. So really look forward to your inputs and all the collective wisdom that you bring to the table, Payal. And we'll just get to that in a bit. And I do want to welcome Dario, who is our Vice President and General Manager for the Automation and Orchestration Unit at Sumo Logic. And Dario, I believe you are based out of Milan in Italy.
Yes, I'm based out of Milano, Italy, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. I run the SOAR business here at Sumo, coming from the acquisition of a company that I founded called the DF Labs, that has been acquired by Sumo last year. And our mission is making the automation even more easy to use and pervasive in the entire technology stack and ecosystem in the company. I currently have authored 5 software patents in the United States linked to automation, orchestration, and incident response. Co-edited 4 ISO standards, including but not limited to the 27035, which is incident response management and security operations, which is pretty linked to the topic that we are going to discuss today. So I'm very happy to be here, and I will be more than glad to give answers to, I'm sure, many questions will come.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think all the experience that you bring to the table is really going to be very valuable for the folks out here. So with that, let me move forward. Welcome again, Payal and Dario. So just a quick sort of disclaimer, if you will. This is not going to be a PowerPoint presentation, right? We don't have like 50 slides out here. It's more to set the context, and we'll get maybe just a few minutes, and we'll get started off with the actual question and answers. If you have any questions, and this is to the audience, there is a Q&A panel somewhere at the bottom of your screen. You can put up your questions there. We'll try and take as many questions as we can in the course of this session. But however, if we're not, then we'll make sure that the responses do get emailed to you in due course of time, within a week, hopefully. And if there are certain unaddressed issues, or if you do have any follow-up questions, I've put out an email ID out here, and you can direct all your questions to this email ID, and we'll try and keep the conversation going. Right. So with that, let's get straight into this. I mean, there has been a lot of talk about CERT. I think 28th of June is when the directive came out. It is not legislation right now, but I think people do need to comply to what CERT-In is saying for a variety of reasons. But apart from all the processes, etc., that you're allowed, is supposed to put in place, I think what it fundamentally boils down to from a technology stack standpoint, which is what we're going to discuss today, is that I think there are 4 key requirements. Okay, there is incident reporting within a time frame of 6 hours. It doesn't stop at that. CERT-In may come back to you asking for additional information, and that could be in less than 6 hours. In fact, in some cases, it could be real time as well. And this is not what I'm saying. This is right from the annexure that CERT-In has put out. There has to be secure, from a security incident standpoint, there has to be log retention for 180 days. And what it also says that if you have KYC data and financial transaction data, then you need to store that within the Indian jurisdiction for a period of at least 5 years. So I think fundamentally that's what CERT-In is asking us to do. There are some ancillary requirements in terms of you need to synchronize your time clock with NIC or National Physical Laboratory. You need to have a point of contact, dedicated point of contact who CERT-In can reach out to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So those are some of the logistics that we can obviously work through. So with that context, okay, let me just quickly move on and say that if you need to get this done, and this could obviously apply to CERT-In as well as many other requirements from a compliance standpoint. How do you really do this? Okay, and let's not talk about vendors or Sumo Logic out here. How do you get this done? What are the right foundation and enablers that you need to have in place? Well, my perspective here is that first and foremost, you need to have visibility. You need to have visibility into anything and everything that is present as part of your IT or your business ecosystem. Visibility to all your users, applications, infrastructure, all kinds of data that is coming in, because you cannot monitor and you cannot report on what you cannot see. So visibility is absolutely critical. And with that, obviously, it has to be consistent, because inconsistency is not the friend of security. Complexity is not the friend of security, right? So it needs to be very, very simple to manage. And as a corollary to that, it has to be scalable, because many of us are either on the cloud or moving to the cloud, all kinds of cloud. And that world needs to be very, very scalable. So depending on the kind of workloads that you're running, your reporting and thereby your analytics system also needs to be at cloud scale. And it has to be integrated, because till you don't put all of these constituents, if you will, within your IT ecosystem together, it's very difficult to get together and comply to those kind of requirements that CERT-In is asking for, either in real time or within a period of 6 hours. And obviously, Dairo is going to talk a lot about this, but whatever you can automate has to be automated, because a lot of the bad guys are coming at us with a lot of algorithms and automation. Our response cannot be manual, and we all know that. We live this day in and day out. And last but not the least, you need to have a platform that gives you continuous intelligence in order to comply to all of those guidelines. What I mean by continuous intelligence, and take a step back, is that you have a lot of these, everybody has infrastructure, applications, cloud, so on and so forth in their organizations. And now there's a lot of IoT as well coming in. We hear that from the market and our customers. And the challenge is today that all of them are throwing out data in different formats. They're throwing it out in different batches, at different times, okay? And putting all of this together is very, very complex, right? So the analytics, if you will, and thereby reporting cannot be sequential. It cannot be batch processed. All of it has to be real time and continuous if you're able to kind of, quickly, comply, and at the same time get on with your jobs and add value to your own businesses. So you have to have a platform which does not give you sequential, but rather continuous intelligence. Okay. And with that, I'd like to introduce Sumo Logic. For those of you who may not be aware of what Sumo Logic is or what we do, essentially we are a machine learning platform which delivers continuous intelligence. And if I just were to kind of go back one slide and look at all of those 6 traits, I'm pretty proud to say that we possess all of those 6 traits. If you talk about visibility as an example, we can see everything in your organization. We are oblivious to where it comes from. It could be cloud, IoT, server, laptop, cloud, VMware, Citrix, virtualization layer, infrastructure layer, IoT layer, logs, metrics, traces, structured, unstructured data. What we essentially do in a very simple in a simple paradigm, is that we pick up all of the data, process that in the Sumo Logic platform. Obviously, there's a lot of technology that goes behind this, but we process all of that at cloud scale, right? And have the ability to integrate that with multiple constituents, so bring it all together, okay, in an automated fashion, and give you that continuous intelligence in the form of multiple use cases, which could either be a business use case, an operational use case, or a security use case. So if I were to sort of productize that, that could be like an observability platform. It could be a log management and a monitoring platform, a SIM SOAR tool, infrastructure as a code, and lots more. But anyway, we are not here to talk about Sumo Logic. This is not a Sumo Logic sales pitch, okay? But more relevant to our discussion today is that we have the ability to aggregate, information, logs, etc., from multiple places, okay? Process those and give that back to you in the form of, very, very elaborate security analytics. Okay. And then you can look at things like, incident management, event management. Then you can start looking at, how do you sort of look at automating all of that? How do you start orchestrating all of that and then responding to some of those things, right? Which is not relevant only from a compliance and certain standpoint, but in general to your overall security posture. Okay. And I'll not speak too much about this because that's what our panelists are going to tell us about. But I think what we are able to do is give analytics to you pretty much in real time, which is actionable, because there is no point in having information or analytics which you cannot deploy, right, to take decisions, as the needs of your business demand. So we have the ability to give you those actionable security analytics, which is great. And then, we have the ability to put together a lot of threat investigation with a lot of context, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Okay. So, and this is going to be my last slide. So at a very high level, I'm not saying we're the silver bullet to solve all your issues, but I think if you ask yourself the question that is Sumo Logic able to deliver whatever is required from a certain standpoint, I would say notionally yes. Okay. We may not be able to do all of this, right? So we may need to partner with some of the other folks which are already present in your ecosystem. But the probability that we're able to solve a lot of these requirements, I think we would pretty much, tick all of those boxes, right? So if you do want to have a conversation with us about this or otherwise, then feel free to, reach out to us. And, I've already provided the email ID. So with that, what I'm going to do is stop sharing and get right into the panel discussion. And Payal, my first question is for you. And, it's great to hear that, you've been in the industry for a while and you've been managing the SOC for a while. Okay. And I think the SOC is absolutely fundamental to every organization today. And especially in terms of the compliance landscape, certain plus so many other compliances that, we are all subject to. So the question to you, Payal, is, what are the characteristics of a great SOC? And in your experience, how's that been?
So, Anand, to be very honest, if you ask me to define characteristics, I think there's going to be a huge list. But I think the basics that any SOC and the fundamentals or the building blocks that any SOC should have is the right set of technologies, wherein you have appropriate security technologies that give you the right data, the right events for you to actually understand what's happening within your organization. Because that's the key role of a SOC, to give you a picture of a security overview of what's happening, a blueprint of security for your organization. So it's very important to invest in the right and appropriate technologies that give you the insights on it. The second would be the right people. So if you have the right technology, you also need to have the right people to run it. And when I talk about people, obviously we are also talking about automation now, but that's something which is never. It's not going to it's an efficient way of automating stuff in the security, but that's not going to mean that we are going to have less people, or the skills are going to not be required anymore. So the right set of skills within the SOC to have that kind of an analysis or triaging or incident investigation to be done. And the third and the very important again is uh, to stitch these together is you need to have the right processes in place. So these three are the fundamental and the basic things. And then of course there are a lot of other magnitude of things that come into the play, such as having your threat intelligence in the place, having threat hunting skills, or having a vulnerability assessment or a pen test or a red team activity. So these are again different components, and we can talk a lot more detail in it. But I think people, process, and technology stick to the basics to begin with, and I think that will be good.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into, I think, a lot of the discussion that is going to come. So I think those are great inputs. So Dario, and you've probably been through this before, working across customers, not just in India, but across the globe, that, there are so many legislations which are there across countries, across verticals. And some of these are demanding, but more what also happens is that there are frequent changes to those legislations. Okay. So how does one really deal with that? And what's the sort of secret sauce to go and manage that entire paradigm?
Conceptually, coping with the regulation should be handled in the same way DevOps work with the continuous change management within the IT ops and other pieces of the technical organization. So basically, the companies should be able to implement a continuous adapting process that is able to then cope with the regulations that, as you say, then are continuously, let's say, diplomatically evolving, if not changing dramatically, depending from the type of policy that is implemented. I would say that technically there is a conjunction between two elements. Look at Lego, two bricks in the Lego wall. Starting from the top, the process and the organization of the processes is absolutely fundamental. You cannot have the right execution of the technology side if you don't have the right processes in place. Usually in this sector, you have basically two steps. The first is the assessment and the adaptation of the current situation versus the general legislative framework, which is the more high level, which is mostly handled by compliance, high level compliance. And a little bit below, a layer below, is the assessment and the execution versus the vertical set. So in this particular case that we are going to handle today in our conversation, there is a general set framework that needs to be in place, and then a continuous capability to adapt the framework to the legislation and the implementation of those legislation and in the way that can guarantee the requirement that are satisfied. Then, only then, you can accelerate, and you must accelerate as a company with the technology strategy and tactic execution. That is mandatory. You cannot have the right compliance, the right coping with the cybersecurity legislation without an implementation and execution layer. The good news is that technology in this case can help. Technology can help and is effective in two ways. One is definitely the capability to integrate, to have an open integration to any third-party bricks, legislative or technical, that may be required by a particular rule. And second, having a user experience that facilitates the usage. Otherwise, if you don't have the second, you may implement the first, but you take the risk to not using it.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Dario, I think the user experience in all of this is also pretty fundamental, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, understood. Good. So again, following up that to your opening statement, Payal, or your opening answer, actually, in terms of the SOC. Now, when something like this comes, what really happens in a SOC, in the sense, you get a directive, and then the SOC team needs to come together and plan and figure out, okay, now what are we going to do? How do we put the process in place? And then, okay, these are the 20 directives. How do I prioritize? What should I do? Who does what, et cetera, right? And then, there is also this whole element of, it's all time bound, I have to do this within whatever, 5 hours, 10 hours, 6 hours, whatever that is, right? So, as a customer and practically on the ground, how does this really work? I mean, really keen to hear your views on that.
So this really depends on the maturity of the SOC that we are working in. So if you ask me if there is a SOC which is in its initial stages of build up, or has just begun its journey towards monitoring and security, I think there's a lot of work that will need to be done on those lines in time with the directives. But if you ask me from a mature software, you have the right technologies, you have it been working for a while now. You will have, a lot of these things already in place. For example, if you talk about the incident types that have been listed in the directive, a lot of these are something which would already be taken care of as a part of the SOC monitoring and detection. For example, a phishing or a recon or anything of those 20 that are listed, a lot of them are already something which are in the current scope of monitoring and detection for a SOC. But at the same time, having the right set of documentation, because there's a lot of alert fatigue, or what you call it as a noise in a SOC that comes along when you have such use cases defined or such monitoring and detection in place. So it's very important to have the right documentation in place, wherein you have runbooks for each of these threat scenarios. So you know that, okay, if my tool has thrown an alert for, say, a phishing, I know that these are the 10 steps that need to be done, to make sure that we are actually getting to the root of the incident and determining whether it's actually an incident or an alert at the very first place. Once you determine if it's a true positive, it's actually not an alert, but an incident that needs to be reported to the regulators. It's only then, when the complete incident management falls into the place. Before that, it's just alert investigation and initial triaging. So, and the follow-up question to this of having a time, specific time to report this in. So this is actually very tricky, because it's having 6 hours to report an incident could be a little tricky, because it's not always possible to determine whether it's a potential incident or an alert within that time frame. But what I understand, and this is again my view, is it's always good to notify, because we've also got their contact information, and to alert them if we've seen something suspicious. It's always good to notify, and then as and when you investigate further, obviously you will unfold a lot of other things as well for that particular notification that has gone to the regulator. So I think you can take it up from there. But this is how we look at handling these 20 incidents.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you make, because and you talked about alert fatigue, and there's probably millions and millions of incidents that that keep coming in. There's so much of data that comes in. How do you really kind of figure out what is relevant? How do you drill down to what is relevant, and then what do you actually report, right? I mean, you could have so many incidents that's come in, and I can relate to this. You can have so many incidents. Do you report everything, or do you kind of distill this and report it and everything? But I think, as you rightly said, I think that's a great input, that it's a good idea to just, if you see something, then just go ahead and, report it, and then, look at it from a follow-up mechanism as well, right? Cool. I think that's a great input. And then again, on the topic of reporting, and this one's for you, Dario, I think a lot of this is based on the reporting capabilities that we put in place within the organization. So how does that entire thing work, Dario? And what goes behind all of these reports? Do you want to share a little bit of your feedback and insights about that?
Never, like in this period, the conjunction between the data sources, so the investigative and the alert layer, plus the automation has become so important. If we are trying to map what the technology should be able to provide in these particular cases, I personally envision two steps of the activity. The first is definitely dealing with data sources, because it's all about data collection. In fact, if you look at the regulation that we are talking about, there is a big component of retention even for reconstructability and evidentiary role of those data. So the data collection is very important, and that is usually up to the CM. The CM should be able to provide retention and investigation and alerting capabilities that should be, I would say, must be repeatable. You cannot perform the investigation on the data just one time. I don't want to go too much into forensics, but it is clear that the CERT is looking for something that can be repeated from a post-mortem reconstruction standpoint. But of course, like Payal said, you cannot do everything by hand. You cannot do it manually. You need a layer of automation that is able to reduce the noise and at the same time present actionable results. So this is where automation comes in. And again, it is not just about alert escalation, but it's about creating a set of data that then can go into the reporting, to get back to your original question, Anand. And from my experience, you have basically three report-related components that you should have in mind. The first one is the evidence collection. Reports means nothing if you are not able to backtrace the activity into the original evidence. That's why they are asking for a strong log retention at that level. The second is the triage capability. You have the alert, then you can and you should automate the triage, so understanding and corroborating the alerts, and then come back and then generate a series of distilled information. I like the term. So recap the information that go into reports. What is the benefit? The main benefit is that you put into report only the things that you are substantially aware and secure that can potentially be a violation. So that is very important, because if you start to report the noise, then you will be exposed to a series of follow-up from the regulator, and you don't want to be that side. And at the same time, the report should be dynamic. The automation should help you to refresh the report, refine the report, and of course, reduce the reaction time.
Yeah, so what I heard, Dario, is about the ability to put in a lot of repeatability. And I think that's a great input.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the probability that you will have to start do this again and again on a day in and day out basis, that process cannot be manual. It has to be automated. Yeah. And so I think that's again something that is really, really key. So I think great inputs about that, and just hold on to that, because I think we should talk a little bit more about that. I think we do have a few questions from the audience, and some of them I'll just quickly pick on. I think Ganesh is asking that do you have a cloud system that is based out of India? The answer is yes. We can pretty much ensure that all of it is compliant with the laws of the land and the jurisdiction requirements that is set forth by the government of India. So that is done. Somebody is also asking that when you talk about financial transaction data, he's asking that do you look at logs? Do you look at Swift logs? Do you look at transaction logs? The answer is yes. And I think what we can also ensure is that the logs are also immutable, which means that once you log something in the system, you cannot change it. You gotta if you need to change it, then you need to essentially delete it. Otherwise, you cannot do anything with that log, right? So hope that answers your question. Okay, and I think there are some other questions coming in, which I will potentially pose a little later on. But yeah, I mean, there is a Q&A window out there. Do put your questions in as we move along out there. Okay. So while when we spoke about the processes, I think that is something which is really, really key, because I think the technology is something which, as a community of professionals, technology professionals, is something that we could potentially figure out. But what really makes the difference and what really gives the edge and what really gives all of those operational capabilities to the organization is the ability to put in place a really, really good set of processes, which you alluded to sometime earlier. So really keen to understand, and I think the audience is also keen to understand that how do you really go about this, and any inputs from your side in terms of the process part of it, really, really valuable.
Sure. So to actually stitch a process depending on the complexity of the organization that you're working at, it's really important whether it's a simple a team-to-team communication, or having multiple stacks of layers of communication between multiple people and technologies to get an incident investigated, or to look at even initial triage. Like Dario just mentioned, that you need to have repeatability in terms of looking at the alert, so that you only filter out what's valuable and the noise is actually discarded. So one of the key components to that is also have the right set of steps within a playbook when you automate it, or even if you're doing it manually. But most of this can easily be automated, which is also a part of your initial triage. So if we pick an example of, say, maybe a phishing attack that has happened or a malware attack that has happened, what usually will happen is there will be an alert that will get triggered for a particular host or an endpoint. But to have a holistic view of whether a user has actually clicked on it, whether it has actually led to any further compromise or access for a particular malicious, indicator. So all of this correlation can only happen if you have the right teams collaborate with each other, the right technologies actually be in sync. The right term for this is to have a fusion center in place, wherein you have the technologies talk to each other. The teams that are working in silos actually talk to each other and collaborate and work towards an incident resolution together. So the processes that you build should mainly focus on fusing a lot of this, what we already do as a part of our daily operations in silos together as a part of your SOC.
Okay, so you have this whole notion of a fusion center where you sort of try and bring everything together so that everybody's able to kind of extract whatever value you may want from that particular instance. And okay, I think that's an interesting concept, and probably we'll come back to that a little bit later on again, Payal. I think that's an interesting concept as well. So Dario, in terms of, again, when you're talking about processes, how does automation play in? I mean, we'd really love to talk about how do you start leveraging automation, especially in the security context, and start marrying it with some of the processes that we just spoke about.
My experience suggests me that there are two types of automation value that people can get. The first is out of the so-called routinary tasks or manual tasks, so things that basically are constituting and consolidated as basic episodes that respectfully does not deserve level 1 or level 2 analyst attention unless the patterns are indicating that something new and anomalous is coming out. So usually, the normal phishing, the normal attempts, and all these things that are actually consolidated as a normal alert are usually fully automated. And I will talk in a bit about the measurement of the ROI and so forth of the automation. But this is something that usually customers, even the less sophisticated, can automate, because that makes you save a lot of time. In the particular case that we are discussing, allows you to create reports that are more consolidated, quicker, and actually are the basic indicators that may be borderline included in this 6-hour time frame that I diplomatically say is going to be the next 12 months nightmare for the Indian colleagues, because if here in Europe we were not able to do the 24 hours reporting in a constructing way without exposing the companies at the risk, imagine in 6 hours, that is going to be really a demand from difference in teams. And that's why, as Payal said, usually the conjunction with the technology and the team will be the real differentiator in this particular case. The second type of automation value can be derived and can be associated to the high complexity incidents and alerts. While the first category, so the phishing and so forth, usually is characteristics of mostly basic incident related to financial services. More complex incidents such as the DDoS in telcos are going to be helped by the automation as well. The difference between the two is that the complexity of the first chunk of incidents is relatively low, while the second, the DDoS, I made the example, may involve a lot of third parties internally and externally. So the automation may have really the role of connecting tissues between the various departments. We personally created playbooks for big telcos where actually we had 20 different third parties involved in DDoS mitigation. So you cannot perform this reaction manually anymore. And And then there is a third residual category at the moment where automation can help. I think this is currently limited to more sophisticated users, but it will become mainstream. My prediction in the next 24 months, it is the automated threat hunting, which is something that you cannot do only with the CM, but you can valorize with the CM and the SOAR together, because usually the CM get access to data sources that are in the company perimeter, while SOAR get access to bigger range of data sources. So actually the two bricks on the Lego in conjunction can create this automated threat hunting that I'm sure is going to be a trend in the next 24 months. Anand?
Okay, so if I can summarize what you said as part of that response, Dario, and I think it's a good discussion, that there are some of these which are relatively simple to handle. There is some which is a little more complex to handle, where you obviously need to put in, automation at scale, especially for some of the more complex attacks, which are not just, emanating from single sources, but from multiple sources. And that could be a whole ecosystem as well. And that's interesting. And would love to have a follow-up conversation on that. And what you really said about the threat hunting piece and how it ultimately gets automated, I think that's going to be really, really key. Yeah, and we'd love to, either in this, if we have time, or as part of a follow-up conversation, really touch about how does the automation play out as far as, the threat hunting is concerned.
Yes, because by the way, we will talk about it later, I think, but because this is the logical flow, I think that in this particular case, this is not just about machine to machine kind of interaction, but usually, and it's not only the literature, but also the practice, the relationship machine, human machine. So the human involvement in automated threat hunting is something that is an interesting topic to investigate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Payal, this one's to you. That we spoke about automation, and I know you've been a practitioner for a while now. So challenges, what are some of the challenges that come about when you look at implementing automation?
So one of the easiest challenge that I can think of is, so usually it comes with a integration stack. You have a set of technologies that you can easily integrate with, but it's not always applicable for custom applications or a few of the applications. And in that case, integration and having the entire chain of workflow becomes really very difficult. In most of the cases, I've seen this as a challenge as wherein your SOAR component is different than your tip component and your SIM component. Actually having these three critical technologies talk to each other in an efficient way becomes a big challenge, and you need to have the right skills as well. You need to have people to actually code and to create that kind of an integration and the data flow between these technologies. So this has been one of the critical challenges that I have seen and I've come across. Also, when we talk about a human to technology workflow, that also at what extent can you automate that, or at what extent can you have that interaction with the platform, is there's again a limitation to it. So you can have a creator and a checker mechanism, but again there are a lot of restrictions when it comes to creating workflows or playbooks or automation processes. The third and the final is more from a management point of view, which is having the right expectations from automation. So it's a notion that and I'm sure you must have also heard it, and many on the webinar would also agree to it, that a lot of people they have this notion of, if you have automation in place or if you have a SOAR technology in place, you can actually reduce the number of people that you have working in your SOC. So that's actually a wrong picture to have for a SOAR, because SOAR can help you respond in a quicker way, help you efficiently work, help you get better results and output, but it definitely does not reduce the manpower. And this is again my view, but these are the three challenges that I have come across.
Yeah, I think interesting. I think also the fact that you mentioned about getting and setting the expectations right is, I think, also super critical, right? Because the technology will do what it's supposed to do, but at the same time, having the appreciation of what it can do and what are some of the limitations and the time frame in which it can be done is also, I think, important to level set as you start looking at some of these technologies. Okay, good. And you touched upon what Dario said in terms of the prodigal question, man versus machine. So Dario, I'm just going to put that up your alley right now. And I know it's one of your favorite topics, the man versus machine part of it. Okay, so this entire automation and human and that intersection, or whatever you may call it, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on that, Dario.
Time ago, I think it was 5 years ago, we just started with SOAR. At that time, SOAR was really a nerd topic, because very few engineers understood what SOAR was about. So I had a dinner with a CISO of a very big oil and gas corporation in the US. And the guy told me, okay, we are going to get this. We are going to invest. I don't want you to speak about SOAR replacing human, because I will have issue with the labor unions, because they will start believing that SOAR is going to replace the workers in the company. And I was very straight at the same way. And I said, look, this is not going to replace humans, but it's going to make them more, let's say, active in the job, more passionate about the job, and valorizing their role within the organization. As it has been said before, the relationship between automation and human intervention is one of the key of the success of this kind of project. Let's give a little bit more of example. One of the main issues in managing a security operations centers and SecOps in general within companies is people retention. The same recruiters that brought you the security analyst a year before are going to pick up the same analyst for another customer in 12 months, because they are going to offer them more money. There is a war between recruitment agencies to bring the talents and move them. And you just look at LinkedIn and you say that that is true. Why these people leave the company? The money, but we cannot put words in it. But second, the job. The job must be interesting. These are people with very bright minds. They don't like to be involved in very routinary tasks continuously, like pushing the button of a burglar alarm in physical security. These people need to be mentally stimulated. So the dream of these people is shorten the period that they will be a level 1 analyst as much as they can, and so they can become level 2 and level 3, and then their mind can be stimulated on very complex case. So the relationship with the automation is very simple. The automation, first of all, is going to relieve their mind from these routinary things. Second, since they are becoming more advanced and they were going to stay in companies where they are mentally stimulated, but they are still few people, they cannot spend hours on a single incident, so they need to scale some of their activity, but they still must be in control. As soon the automation is implemented in a way that the moment the decision is required, the human is still the element that is going to take the decision, then the project will have success. And the more the machine will become advanced, more the people will become advanced, and the more complex will be the case, and the more stimulated these people will be. It's a positive loop.
Yeah, and in fact, I don't know if you listen to Bruce Springsteen, in his song "The Human Touch," he actually says that get a little of that human touch. So yeah, I mean that has that has to be there.
We are not ready to disappear from the process. I think it will take a lot of time. Humans are necessary because decision cannot be taken by the machines, especially when there is a legal liability involved potentially.
Oh no, absolutely, absolutely, and that always has to be a fundamental consideration as well. Yeah. So Payal, I'm just going to come back to your comment on your fusion center, which you will. Let's really interesting. Okay. And as we talk about, multiple teams, multiple people working together to achieve a common objective, right, for the common good of the organization, how do you sort of start looking at bringing them together? I mean, how do people start collaborating amongst this, lot of diversity from a technology standpoint, from a process standpoint, and then, that I mean, I'm just trying to figure out the right words, but this fusion center is something which I think I'm really keen for you to touch upon.
So, Anand, this has been one project which is really close to my heart as well, because you always have something that you want to do at work and you want to implement. So this is one of those projects that I always had in my mind. The basics to start with a fusion center is to look at what's actually running in your SOC and silos. So if you see a lot of typical SOCs, they will work, they'll have different teams working and doing their independent jobs, like daily operations. For example, a content developer is going to create some use cases based on his knowledge or his experience. So he's doing his job role. We'll have a threat intelligence team which is only looking at fetching indicators, subscribe to various threat intelligence feeds and getting them blocked at security technologies, or probably just ingesting them in an SIM for monitoring and detection. We'll have incident response team actually look at the alerts that are thrown by the SIM. They are closing these alerts, but what's the end result of these alerts? Were they true positives? Were they false positives? If they were true positives, how are we actually mapping them back as a learning into the SOC? So these are the few pointers that I picked up while I was on this journey, and I've actually looked at each of these domains. Like while I was in this field of cybersecurity, I've actually worked in each of these domains, so I know exactly. Okay, we are doing a task A to B, but then how do we link it to the larger goal and to the end result? So that's wherein we start looking at a fusion center, wherein a threat intelligence team maybe can act as you call it in a typical in a crime scenario. Like you'll have these people at these small shops actually giving you tips and information if there's something about to happen. So I actually picturize as threat intelligence as that team which can actually give me information if there's something happening around the world. What are the latest threats? If there is something observed in another organization, then okay, I'm supposed to be alert, and I immediately inform my SOC team and the content developer to start creating more use cases on it, maybe for a temporary phase, maybe for a month, 3 months, depending on the type of threat that we are looking at. Alert my incident response team if they've seen any patterns in the past, so which creates an internal intelligence for the organization. So this is valuable, this is really valuable information. And if we're able to achieve this with interacting with different teams, we can have the red team actually pick up those attack vectors and try breaching the organization as if they were hackers. So that's also going to give us a lot of loopholes in the security technology stack that we have. So I can keep on going on this topic, but yeah, this is just an overview of what a cyber fusion would mean.
Yeah. I'm just gonna, interrupt the drill and maybe ask you the next follow-up question to you only, Payal, because I think it just plays into what you just spoke about, and also what Dario alluded to in as part of his previous answer, that there's this constant tussle between, not tussle, but the challenge, I would say, to to get the right people, and then HR is always working overtime, etc., and all of that stuff. Now, I think this is also a question that is coming from an anonymous attendee in the audience who asks, and again, it's related to this question in terms of people, skills, capability, shortage, etc. That is it a better idea to manage this in-house, or is outsourcing the strategy? So what's your thought on that?
It's me or Payal?
That was to Payal.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got some error and I got thrown out of the meeting. If you can just repeat the question, Anand, I didn't hear
No, the
you.
question was how, what do you, I mean, is in-house a better strategy, or outsourced is a better strategy when you're looking at a SOC? That's one of the questions from the audience, actually.
Okay. So it completely depends on how you want to implement it. So if you ask me, my point of view would be to have a mix of both, because there are a lot of challenges when it comes to having all the three building blocks in a SOC. So certain things are in the control of an organization, but then you wouldn't want to get into the trivial things, and which are not actually trivial but very important as well, of managing resources and having the right skill set. So if you are if that's not your main business, or if that's not your main streamline work, then I think it's better to have it an independent party manage it for you. And at the same time, you have your own resources or your team as well looking work in the SOC, so that you have that grip as to what's happening and you have your own blood into the play.
Yeah, and I think that's a good perspective. It's very practical, very, very doable. I think, yeah, makes a lot of sense. So Dario, this one's for you. And again, we've been speaking about, and just Payal also alluded to that, in terms of threat intelligence. I think we've heard that pretty much come across pretty much every conversation that we've been having. So really keen to understand that how this is going to play out. What role is automated threat intelligence and thereby threat hunting going to play? So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Let's make a quick example in the physical world. When you are in the police and you want to know if your informers are giving you the right information, so you need to corroborate those information and correlate the information themselves with other information that you may collect. In case of physical robberies, for example, in banks, the police usually have a layer of information that they can get from the street and a layer of predictions made upon control of the territory, and that can be made with technology and so forth. The concept is exactly the same. Open a parenthesis. I'm a former police officer, so it is not movies. I know what is about. So the way it works for threat intelligence is understanding in various sources what's going on, and then eventually escalate if there is a concrete number of correlated information that brings to the same conclusion. Those information may or may not be correlated with actual alerts. That's why I was mentioning the conjunction between SIEM and SOAR before, or they may be part of autonomous and proactive threat analysis and hunting, which is the threat hunting that I was mentioning before. And it is an interesting point. Again, the volume of information being examined cannot be handled manually anymore. So automation and conjunction between technologies is necessary. The fact that the SOAR may definitely put value is because SOAR get usually access to information and third parties that SIEM don't get access to, because SIEM is usually internal kind of protection mechanism. And I saw an interesting question from one of the audience, and I think it's very interesting to understand. The person asked and say, look, many owners, many companies may deny to have or not even mention that have been attacked, because they don't want to communicate outside that they had an issue. How the regulator can make sure that the incidents will be anyway notified to the authority? I'm going to give the same answer that I gave in text to the audience just a few seconds ago. I think that if it works like in other nations in the world that I dealt with, the regulator, in this case, the CERT India, will have a program from threat monitoring and hunting about the targets that they is supposed to protect. So if any information is, for example, found in the dark web or elsewhere, and the company did not notify the incident that happened, of course, they cannot deny it anymore, because the CERT India will know. So I think that the bottom line for this particular question and answer is there must be a collaboration between the two sides of the context, the regulator and the potential targets. In other nations, that worked very well after a period of blood in the street, being very honest. But then the cooperation between entities was absolutely the key. And I think that the 6 hours can be achieved only with this kind of pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great set of inputs. Cool. I think we're almost on the hour. We have 3 minutes left, and probably what I'll do is take one more question from the audience. There are some which we've not been able to answer in this session. We'll follow those up. Uh, I think this is a relevant question, so I'll pose the same question to both of you. And let me start with Payal. They say cloud migration, digital transformation, and IoT are imposing new requirements, on the security operations center. So, your thoughts on that?
So yes, like it's not that it's going to be stagnant. We're always going to have something new to monitor and to look into. So I think there's a lot that's happening on the three of these spaces, and there's a lot which is already available in terms of what needs to be monitored and from a security point of view. So I think it's only valid to have new things.
Yeah, makes sense. Same question to you, Dario, as well. And this will be the final question before we wrap this up.
There will
Cloud
be a
migration, digital
continuous
transformation.
evolution. Sorry, Anand, sorry. Okay. There will be a continuous evolution of regulations and standards that will become mandatory. I would like to add something on top of what Payal just said. The cloud providers, so the entities that are going to provide technology and services through the cloud will be, and are, believe me, they are already subject to such regulations. At Sumo, we have a big security operation centers, compliance officers, and CISOs that are asking maniacally for the requirements being observed and satisfied, continuous audit. So it is not just about end users, but also about service provider at all the level that will be involved in this process.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Okay, so I think we are on the hour. And before we kind of wrap this up, I do want to say thanks to all of the 50 odd attendees or 55 odd attendees who are there speaking to or who have attended this session. No, I know you all lead very busy lives, but you've kind of taken the time to invest 60 minutes in this session and talking to us. So I sincerely do hope that you found value out of this session. We'd love to hear your feedback, and also in terms of how we can make this better going forward. But yeah, I think it's a start, and I think we had a great set of inputs from Payal as well as Dario. So Payal, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this webinar and speaking to our audience. And also Dario, I know it's earlier in the day for you, so but really appreciate the fact that you came about and you spoke to the audience out here. And we'd love to have you in India, by the way, very soon, so that you can meet some
I
of
will
these
love to.
in person as well. Yeah.
Bring the snakes away and I will be there. I will be.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. So with that, I think we've had a great session. It's fantastic, and hope to see you all soon. Take care, stay safe, and happy compliance.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.